and welcome to Deep Dive on News 6 World. I'm Suma Kataoka. Today we're zooming in on the escalating tensions in West Asia and the US military's powerful response to Iran. In a dramatic repositioning, America has deployed 6 warships to the region. But as the US expands its military footprint, questions of hypocrisy emerge. While Washington criticizes other nations for military aggression and territorial expansion, it's now stepping up its own military presence, raised under the guise of defense. U.S. defense officials say the new additions include 4 guided missile destroyers, the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., USS Bruins, USS Mitchell, and USS McFaul, along with 2 littoral combat ships, the USS Santa Barbara and USS Canberra, headed for operations in the Persian Gulf and adjacent seas. Already positioned in the region are the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike group, establishing a powerful nuclear-capable presence alongside other U.S. naval assets. To note, the deployment of these warships are also strategic. Take a look at the positioning. USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. deployed in the central and northern Arabian Gulf, providing support for regional security operations and maritime defense. USS Bruins positioned near the Strait of Hormuz, ensuring safe passage through its vital shipping lane and responding to any potential Iranian provocations. USS Mitchell, operating off of the coast of the United Arab Emirates and across the Arabian Sea, protecting shipping routes and monitoring military activity in the region. USS McFaul stationed in the northern Persian Gulf, providing surveillance and response capabilities in this highly strategic area. USS Santa Barbara deployed in the Strait of Hormuz and along the coastlines of Bahrain and Qatar, engaged in shallow water operations and infrastructure protection. USS Canberra positioned along the Persian Gulf oil shipping lanes, ready for rapid response to any security threats in this critical area. So what does this deployment mean? To fully understand the impact, let's step back and look at the context. The USS Gerald Ford and USS Abraham Lincoln carriers were already stationed in the region, but this latest military repositioning marks a dramatic escalation. This move comes at a time when diplomatic negotiations between Washington and Tehran remain tense. Furthermore, the U.S. has been working to extend the pressure on Iran to negotiate over its nuclear program and regional activities. What does this military push indicate about U.S. policy in the Middle East? For decades, the U.S. has maintained a strong military presence in the Persian Gulf as a means of projecting power and ensuring the stability of the region. But this latest deployment could signal a shift in strategy. The United States is not just showing its strength in response to Iranian actions, but also to demonstrate its commitment to the region at a time of uncertainty. The U.S. presence is about more than just defense. It's about making a political statement, a statement that regardless of the outcome of diplomatic talks, the United States will continue to ensure its interests and the stability of the Gulf. Meanwhile, Tehran has been watching this escalation closely. With some officials warning of the consequences of the increased U.S. presence, this raises a core question. Is the U.S. positioning itself for a potential conflict, or is this an effort to force Iran back to the negotiating table? The implications of this military deployment could be far-reaching, not only for the U.S. and Iran, but for the entire region. Firstly, the increase in military strength could shift the balance of power, particularly in the Persian Gulf, where tensions with Iran have long been a point of contention. This military repositioning is a direct response to concerns over Iran's ballistic missile program and its regional influence. Secondly, it could have ramifications for U.S. allies in the region. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, who are watching these developments closely, may see this as a sign of U.S. intentions to protect them from any potential Iranian threats. But there's a catch. This military deployment comes at a time of global diplomatic crisis. U.S. officials have been engaged in multilateral talks with other countries over Iran's nuclear activities. These new deployments could undermine efforts to pursue a diplomatic resolution. In the coming days and weeks, all eyes will be on the Persian Gulf, the U.S. Navy, and whether this military mighty push will lead to further diplomatic efforts or into a more tense and complicated standoff. And the question remains, is this an effort to protect U.S. interests or a signal of the United States' long-term military strategy in the region? Will this move bring about a shift in the balance of power, or will they simply strengthen U.S. influence in the Middle East? These are the questions we will continue to watch closely. Now for this discussion, we are welcoming retired Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. He's a former Army commander, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Lieutenant General, for joining us on NewsX World. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me. Great pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Now, diving into my first question, Washington frames this surge as a defensive one within striking range of Iran's most sensitive maritime corridors. Where does deterrence end and provocation begin? Is this a genuine move towards regional stability?
See, what you're saying is can power play manifest across the globe. The Americans have 800 bases, military bases spread across the globe, and 11 aircraft carriers, which you described at great length. So this naval power is to enforce American interests across the globe, the cardinal principle of which is that no hegemon should emerge in any other theater that questions American primacy. And since the Ayatollah regime in Iran was beginning to do that, last year you saw Operation Rising Lion, Midnight Hammer, that was primarily targeting Iran's nuclear arsenal, but also was a signal that America was willing to intervene militarily in order to protect American interests. And since that, you are now seeing a gradual escalation of American military power in profile and prowess, and coercion is built into that. So that is how I see things evolving. I'm not surprised at all. This is American power play at its very best.
Thank you for highlighting that, Lieutenant General. Now, the 2026 National Defense Strategy calls for regional allies like the UAE and Saudi Arabia to take primary responsibility for deterring Iran. Yet, with the deployment of littoral combat ships like the USS Canberra and USS Santa Barbara for infrastructure protection, the US seems to be deepening its direct military footprint rather than reducing it. Is this burden sharing in name only, and how do regional powers balance their need for U.S. protection against the risk of becoming launch pads for a potential U.S.-Iran conflict?
Even before the national security strategy, the Americans had invoked the Abraham Accords to get Israel and the Arabs together, and in so doing, attain ascendancy over the Iranians. So that bit has happened. America is encouraging Israel and its Arab allies to come closer together. You also see that reflected in the construct of the Gaza Peace Accord. But if you are talking of the military burden being taken on by the Arab allies, I don't think that is going to happen in the near future, because the oil-rich Arabs can invest. They have a lot of treasure to invest in military platforms, but I don't think they are willing to shed blood. And in that sense, their militaries are not cutting edge and potent. They may have platforms, they offer bases to the Americans, but the fighting on their behalf has to be done either by the Israelis or the Americans. That is the reality. So burden sharing in terms of treasure, yes, they're not short of money to buy defense systems, but the fighting will have to be done by the Israelis and the Americans for the near future, and that accounts for the many American bases there, air defense systems like Patriots and the THAADs, fighter aircraft. And when they have to amass further power, they bring 2 or 3 of their 11 aircraft carriers. And that is what you see now. The American military muscle in concert with the Israelis, coercing the Iranians and telling them that they should come to the negotiating table. What the Americans fear the most is Iranian missiles, especially if they are nuclear tipped. And what is even more terrifying is if they can reach the American mainland. So Midnight Hammer was about rolling back the nuclear arsenal. Now the coercion and the associated talks, the design of the Americans is to get the Iranians to roll back their missile arsenal. Because as long as the missile arsenal remains intact, the Iranians can target American bases in the region, they can hit back at the Israelis are short of AD interceptors, and if the ranges of the missiles grow at some time, they can also target the American mainland. So I think that is the grand design of American statecraft.
Thank you for highlighting that. And Lieutenant General Shukla, last but not least, the U.S. frequently criticizes other global powers for territorial expansionism and militarizing international waters by deploying a massive nuclear-capable armada to the Persian Gulf to secure shipping lanes it deems vital. Is Washington not applying a double standard? How can the U.S. maintain its moral authority as a defender of international law when it uses unilateral military might to dictate the security architecture of a region thousands of miles from its own shores?
In the international system, power outranks morality. So the final arbiter of your national interest is the power that you possess. Morality matters, but in far lesser degree. So when the Americans have power, in that famous question that Trump posed to Zelensky, what cards do you have? Any nation which does not have the cards will have to submit to American coercion. And that's exactly what's happening. If you see the recent protests in Iran, so what was the grand design? There was great resentment on ground, but the protests were also fueled by the Mossad and the Americans, and it was hoped that they would reach tipping point by themselves. But they did not reach tipping point because the Americans at that point, their aircraft carriers were deployed for Venezuela. They could not concentrate them in time to attack the Iranian regime. So, somebody said that the world is in a huge ocean, and even for the mighty Americans, they discovered that they had too few ships. They could not concentrate the aircraft carriers in time, and the protests ultimately they faded out. So now what the Americans also realize that unless they can target the Iranian regime in concert with the protests, the Iranian regime will not be taken out, and if the Iranian regime remains intact, they can carry out endless repression. They killed, I think, more than 30,000 protesters and are still in power. So now the whole purpose of this military coercion is to get them to roll back their missile arsenal, perhaps obtain some concessions in the structure of the regime, how they deal with the protesters. And the Iranians, in turn, are looking for sanctions to be diluted or lifted. So that is how power plays across theaters. And to your fundamental question, morality is important. Unfortunately, in the real world, it's not very significant. Our own Swami Vivekananda often reminded us, he said the world is a gymnasium where nations come to make themselves strong. So while we may not like it, the unfortunate reality is that power matters. And we are seeing that power unfold in West Asia at this point.
Yes, indeed. With that, I'd like to thank Lieutenant General Raj Shukla for joining us on Deep Dive. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this edition of Deep Dive. Stay tuned on News 6 World for more news and updates.